Let's get to Steve Heretick. Steve, great to have you with us.
Good morning, John. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving.
No, better. How about yourself?
Not too bad. I apologize in advance. I'm working on a cold, so if I sound a little sketchy this morning, it's because I am. But anyway, everything is good. How are you?
Good, Steve. You sound fine. Steve, a member of the House of Delegates in Virginia. He's a Democrat, District 79, but he's kind of a moderate from the Portsmouth area. So, Steve, I want to get to one of the bills that you put in that has to do with legalizing marijuana. I happen to kind of agree with you on some of the stats that you were saying the other day about, the number of resources that we waste on trying and prosecuting marijuana possession. Walk us through your bill and why you think it's the right thing to do for Virginians.
Well, in terms of legalization, John, I think we have to look at the fact that there are 38 other states that already have either decriminalization or legalization on the books, and not including, by the way, the nation of Canada. And I think what we see now is that we have criminalized generations of Americans who, choose to exercise their personal freedom to use marijuana, in probably the same way that I choose to exercise my personal freedom to drink alcohol. And it simply isn't working. We're spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year trying to stop all this when we understand that we are basically causing people their livelihoods. If you're arrested with marijuana today, even simple possession, you can lose your ability to work in certain classified jobs, law enforcement, many other things. And we see that we simply, most Virginians, by opinion polls, certainly over 80% want to decriminalize simple possession of marijuana. Over 65% want to legalize marijuana. And I think it's time that we, as a Commonwealth, took a long, hard, and objective look at doing that, because I think we owe it to our citizens. We realized that, 80 years ago, when the federal government tried to criminalize the sale and use of alcohol, it didn't really work out all that well.
Mm-hmm.
Today, I think we have exactly the same situation, and I think it's time we dealt with it.
All right, so what would your bill entail? Like, is there a limit to the amount? How would you buy it? Just how would this whole thing work?
Basically, John, my bill, I call it from seed to sale. And it calls for a fairly extensive amount of state regulation of marijuana, from not only the planting and cultivation, but to the method in which it's raised, the method in which it's produced, marketed, and sold. But basically, it would allow Virginians, and my bill does require that anyone who is manufacturing and selling marijuana in Virginia, that those companies that do that be predominantly Virginia-owned, so we don't have conglomerates from California or, elsewhere coming into the Commonwealth and kind of doing business in our place. And basically, it would require the State Department of Agriculture to oversee, those farmers who choose to raise it in much the same way that they do now with hemp cultivation. Moving forward, there would be restrictions on, how it is processed, how it is sold, but frankly, it would allow for the private sales. That is, we don't have to go through a state ABC store system, for example, but there would be private outlets, which would allow us to buy and to purchase marijuana, much the same way that they do in, like I said, about 38 other states in the country.
Could you buy as much as you want?
There would be a certain limit, but that remains to be decided. I don't think you could go in and buy, 5 pounds, for example. But I do think that, like Washington, D.C., for example, there would be a reasonable daily maximum that you could purchase. I don't know why anybody would want to buy, would need to buy extreme amounts of marijuana. But by the same token, there should be a reasonable limit. I'm thinking, this remains to be worked out, but I'm thinking that probably, 2 or 3 ounces max a day would certainly satisfy anybody's need and, would keep us sort of from, looking at a black market situation where we would have people selling
right.
marijuana under the radar, much like you might be able to buy and sell moonshine today in certain parts of Virginia.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. We're with Steve Heretick, Democratic House of Delegates member, Virginia, 79th District, that is in Portsmouth. Steve, so when you say seed to sale, could someone in Virginia, if your bill passes, grow their own marijuana in their basement like they did back in the day?
Yes, indeed, and frankly, the bill does permit for certain limited production for private use. And I think that, the bill as it currently exists would allow you to have up to 8 mature plants and 8 plants in development. And again, for private use, that is not for resale to anyone else, but it would allow you to basically grow your own.
Would you tax it?
Certainly. The retail sale of marijuana would be taxed up to, and we're looking at somewhere between 13 and 15% excise tax. So there would be a return to the Commonwealth. It would help. My proposal is we stick it toward education, but needless to say, most of my colleagues might.
All right, we're back with Steve Heretick. Steve Heretick, a House of Delegates member, Democrat, 79th District. That's the Portsmouth area. So, Steve, let's get to one of your colleagues, Chap Peterson, in the Senate, really is opposed to this. And Chap's a Democrat, and he says, look, I try these cases. And he says, my experience has been that marijuana is the gateway to harder, more dangerous drugs. Alcohol doesn't provide that same avenue. What is your response to that?
Well, I would tell Senator Peterson that I try these cases too. And I've tried them, frankly, John, on both sides of the aisle. I started my career as a federal prosecutor, and I help lock people up for drug offenses and keep them locked up for drug offenses. And I will tell, Senator Peterson or anybody else that the whole notion that marijuana is a gateway drug is frankly not supported by any scientific evidence that I can point to. The more we learn about marijuana, the more we understand that marijuana is no more a gateway drug than beer, for example. And, yes, there are certain individuals who will, use marijuana or alcohol or other substances and then, develop addictions that progress to harder drugs. But frankly, the notion that marijuana is a so-called gateway drug simply is not supported by any scientific evidence.
All right, so you aren't concerned about that. What level of backing do you think you have for your bill? I mean, is this reality? Can you get it out of committee?
Well, I do think that, in terms of decriminalization, I think that the bill that's going to be coming forward this year, which will be sponsored by Charnel Herring, the incoming majority leader, and I'm chief co-patron, I think that will pass. So I think we will see decriminalization of marijuana, up to simple possession of marijuana in Virginia, probably in the next year. What I will be asking the Assembly is this. I don't want to put legislation, out before Virginia is ready to do it. I think we learned from the experience of other states, like Colorado, for example, that legalized the sale of marijuana before they had any idea or any infrastructure that allowed them to do it. So Colorado has been sort of chasing its tail for quite some time in terms of catching up with the infrastructure it needs to do so safely and with appropriate regulation. I'm not going to ask Virginia to do that. What I would ask the Assembly is to hold this bill, to allow us up to 2 years to study it, to identify and create the necessary infrastructure that we would need, both in terms of government and in terms of private industry, and to put all that in place before we legalize it so that when it's legalized, notice I say when, not if, that we have the infrastructure in place ready to go to do it in a safe and orderly fashion so that we don't have the same experience that other states have had in trying to play catch-up.
All right, so Steve, let me get this straight. So what you're saying is in 2020 General Assembly, you're in favor of decriminalizing possession of marijuana for the user. But your bill, which is much more extensive than that, which would allow for, as you said, from seed to weed, or however you said that.
Seed to sale.
Seed to sale. Sorry about that. From seed to sale, your bill goes much further than that. You want it able to be grown both commercially and privately. You would tax it. You would put a limit on how much somebody could buy. I mean, it's a whole extensive thing. But
right.
What you're saying is you're willing to wait a 2-year period to study it and also to develop the infrastructure that would come in behind. Is that my understanding?
That's exactly right, John.
That makes sense.
And I think it frankly, I mean, it's I think Colorado, basically shot and asked questions later, if you know the analogy. And I want to do that. I want to make sure that when we do it in Virginia, we're ahead of it, and it's not ahead of us. And I think to do that, it's going to take more than a year, because frankly, we know from study commissions that I and other members have served on, in a year during the off session, we might have 4 or 5 meetings. That's certainly not enough time, in my estimation, to do something of this magnitude. But I think in about a 2-year time frame, we should be able to sort of work not only with government sources, but with private industry, much like the hemp farmers have done now, and to try to make sure that we understand, from start to finish, what the system would have to look like,
that
how
makes
the system
sense.
would run,
Yeah.
and by the way, who would run it? Because my bill would call for the Department of Agriculture to run it, much like any other cash crop. And I know that other members have, ideas that, for example, the state ABC commission would administer it, or that one of the criminal justice departments would do it. And to me, that's the wrong model. This is a cash crop, and I think we have to treat it as one.
Well, look, I think that makes sense, and I have to tell you, whenever a legislator gets on my show and says, look, I have a bill, but I want to have it studied for a 24-month period to make sure we get this right, that tells me you really want it thought through. So look, I'm not sure that I'm in favor of legalizing it right now, but certainly I would be in favor of studying it over that period of time to make sure that if Virginia goes forward with it, that you've got the right infrastructure in place. Steve Heretick, let's get to gambling in Virginia. This is going to be the issue. The study has already come out. The Family Foundation's already blasted it. Whatever. I could set my clock by it. Here's reality, okay? Everybody's gambling around us. You go to MGM Grand, 50% of the vehicles in Maryland, in the harbor, Virginia plates. You go to Dover Downs, I was there 2 weeks ago. 50% of the plates, 3 hours away, Virginia. Right. You go to Hollywood Casino, West Virginia, 35 minutes out of Leesburg. 70% of the plates, Virginia. The argument against gambling is asinine because we're doing it anyway and spending the money in other states. How do we bring it to Virginia, both casino and bookmaking? And then what happens to the Pamunkey tribe? What happens to Colonial Downs? Have you thought all this through, Steve?
Well, first, John, let me say this. As you know, I am certainly a proponent of allowing casino gaming in Virginia. As you correctly note, we lose hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue a year to other states simply because we, remain a little bit behind the 8 ball in talking about this. I think the legislation that is out there, I think that Delegate Barry Knight in the House sponsored it. I think Senator Louise Lucas in the Senate has sponsored it. I think is reasonable because it allows 5 localities in Virginia to really begin to look at, locating casino gaming in their specific jurisdictions. Mm-hmm. And again, it sets out a fairly orderly process by which we can bring that to Virginia. Now, who would be the gaming companies that do it? I think that still remains an open question. The Pamunkeys obviously have expressed some interest in bringing it to Norfolk. There are several gaming entities that I'm aware that are interested in bringing it to Portsmouth. I know that there is one entity. I think that they just closed, cut a deal with Hard Rock to manage a potential casino in Bristol. Mm-hmm. But really, I think quite properly it falls to the individual community by referendum to allow it in their locality. And to me, that's exactly as it should be. I don't think the casino game is something we should force upon anybody in Virginia. But if localities like mine, and I represent 2 of the 3 jurisdictions that might conceivably have casino gaming, I think if those localities and their voters, want to have it, then I think it should be their right to do it. And I just like my marijuana bill, I want it to come to Virginia in an orderly, safe, and manageable.
Well, we've already had the 1 year study. We've already had the 1 year study, right? And so we've got localities that want it, but you've got the issue of if you bring casino gambling, who manages it? Is it managed through the lottery? They have a system set up. If you bring bookmaking, is it brick or mortar? Is it online? Or is it a combo? To me, if you have bookmaking gambling like, basketball, football, baseball, and it's not online where you can't do it on your phone, that makes no sense to me because that's where the technology is headed. People don't want to go in their car and go out. They just want to be able to bet it online, just like you can do now with OTB. Other question is, and here's going to be the big issue. Mm-hmm. Colonial Downs Company and Rosie's came to the table, brought racing back to Virginia, right? They were the first one there. They have the HHR machines. If they're cut out of this process, like if they don't get a gaming license and it's granted to other people, they go out of business, right? I mean, they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars bringing racing back to Virginia, creating all these jobs, and they get screwed. Are you going to protect them?
Well, John, and I certainly can't address that. I mean, it's not one of my committees that'll be hearing this, but I can tell you that I would be very, very surprised if the Rosie's franchise would be completely left out on the cold on this. Mm-hmm. They've spent a lot of money and acted very, very quickly to put their gaming machines all over Virginia.
Right.
And I have to believe that they did that quite deliberately to get ahead of the whole wave of casino gaming, so that essentially they would plant their flag first.
Right.
Now, I don't believe for a minute that in that conversation that they're going to get lost, among the 5 localities that are currently, contemplated for casino gaming. But I can tell you that right now that's a big subject of conversation, between, the extensive number of lobbyists who are now working on this and the members of the General Assembly who are really pushing this bill forward. I don't think for a minute that they're going to get left out in the cold on this.
All right, so you're confident, certainly from your vantage point, Steve Heretick, you would not be in favor of leaving them out of the conversation. I've only got it right. I mean, because the other thing, it isn't just the Rosie's Gaming, is they brought horse racing back, which they took a big loss on, created a bunch of jobs to bring the thoroughbred racing back to Virginia. I don't think they can get left out of the equation. Final thing. I have less than a minute. Bookmaking, gambling, brick and mortar, online. Do you favor either or both?
I favor both, but frankly, I think what the bill looks at right now is brick and mortar, and I think that's really got to be our focus in the next session. I think that online will follow shortly from that, but right now I think we have to look at physical casinos and getting those off the ground, and then we'll take the rest of it as it comes.
All right, that makes sense. We're out of time. I want to thank Steve Heretick for being with us. Steve Heretick, a member of the Caucus of the Corn, Eileen Filicorn's Democratic Caucus. They're running the show in January. Steve Heretick, thanks for being with us, sir.
Thank you, John. Take care.
Always good to have your input